are in space with Matthew Altruda. Today's episode is Love Like Ghosts. Not really what you'd be thinking for this week's podcast episode with Christmas right here, but sometimes some stories just have to be told, and this story needs to be told today. It really all starts back when I was a child in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I lived in this huge neighborhood with my family. We were all very young. My sister was probably about 4 years old. I was probably 6 years old, and my older sister was 4 years old. It was like 8 or 9. You get the point. In my neighborhood, there was tons of kids my age, and we played, honestly, non-stop. I was outside playing football 24 hours a day. It was really a great place to live because my neighborhood was just loaded with kids. However, some stories started coming out while we were playing, and one of my friends down the street, Brian, told a story about how he kept on seeing ghosts in his room, in his house, and he thought his house was haunted. And his next door neighbor actually said that she saw the same. And as these stories started coming out, I think I over-exaggerated a little bit and said that I saw ghosts too, like in the woods, but I was pretty much lying just because I wanted to be a part of this crazy ghost story. But they went back and told their parents and talked to their parents, and their parents talked, and all of a sudden some other neighbors started talking, and it seemed like the overall theme was our neighborhood was haunted. Granted, my house did not have any hauntings in it, and if it did, then I slept through it. But that's beside the point. So the neighbors decided that they were going to get the priest to come in and talk to everyone in the neighborhood and to find a way that they could maybe help this ghost pass to the other side or just simply get rid of it. I mean, we're talking 80s right here. They probably thought they could just pray it out. You know what I mean by pray. Not the pray. So it was probably like a Sunday after church, 3:30 in the afternoon. The priest at the time asked everyone in the neighborhood to congregate at the church afterwards so we could all have a meeting about this. And it was partly like to get rid of the ghosts, partly it was kind of like to recruit more people to the church, because obviously if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. But everyone showed up, even the Jewish family in our neighborhood, because there was a ghost in our neighborhood and we wanted to get to the bottom of it. Now, this is the crazy part. The priest went up, did his sermon, and started talking to the crowd, and he was like, who in the audience has seen the ghosts? And, you know, everyone started raising their hand. I didn't, I mean, keep in mind it's the 80s. I'm not playing on a cell phone. There's nothing really going on. I'm just sitting there wishing I was at home playing with my toys and hoping this would get over fast. But then he was like, who here has seen the ghost in their house? And more people raised their hands. He asked, who has heard banging from the ghosts? And people started raising their hands. This time I'm getting pretty bored. I'm more or less just thinking about teasing my sister. And then the priest was like, who here has touched the ghost? And like a few people started raising their hands, and I looked over to the right. And so my buddy Brian down the aisle, and he was raising his hand, and I was just like, man, he's going to be like famous and be on TV for seeing ghosts. I mean, it was just what I was thinking at the time. So then the pastor or the priest was like, who here has kissed the lips of the ghost? And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I raised my hand. I wasn't really even paying attention. I raised my hand. And all of a sudden my mom is looking at me and my dad are looking at me like, what the hell is going on? My sister's like, Matthew, please don't. And the priest comes down and walks over to me. And keep in mind, I'm just a child. And he reaches down and looks at me and says, my child, you have kissed the lips of a ghost? And I looked at him and said, ghost? I thought you said goat. Yeah, that's how that story went. And it's actually not true. But I thought I would set the stage for this episode in my own special way. That's a story that my uncle told me when I was a kid when we were telling ghost stories. And it's part of our tradition to tell ghost stories. Ghosts have been around from day one, at least as far as I'm concerned. I mean, humans have always seen ghosts of other humans. I mean, that's just the way it is. It goes back for thousands and thousands of years, which also makes me think, while we're in space, can we only see ghosts of human? I mean, I've never heard of anyone seeing a ghost deer. I guess there's been some ghost horses and some ghost animals, but there's never really a ghost animals. You know, you hear stories about people seeing ghosts all the time, but they're never anything but humans. Which basically leads me to the conclusion, and this has nothing to do with this episode, but just so I can clear this up on We Are in Space. That's Bigfoot. Bigfoot is related to ancient man. We're basically the same species in a way. I mean, we're highly related, which leads me to believe the reason why we're seeing ghosts of Bigfoot, or why people think they're seeing Bigfoot, is just because it's a ghost of ancient man. That's the reason why we don't find Bigfoot poopies. It's the reason why we don't find dead Bigfoot, but it's the reason why we see him. So all those shows you're watching where they're trying to find Bigfoot, and the show on after it is Ghost Chasers, they should be the same show, because Bigfoot is a ghost. Yes, Bigfoot is a spectrum. Alright, now back to Love Like Ghosts. We just had to clear the air on that. And the reason why this story gets even more weirder is because I actually lived in a haunted house. And I can honestly say that I've experienced firsthand and honestly lived with ghosts when I was in high school. And I've never really shared this with pretty much anyone, actually. Really not at all in my life. I maybe talked a little bit in college, but for the most part, I never really wanted to talk about it because I always had this deep down fear that if I talked too much about the ghost, that they would find me. Now, I know that's not true. But I also know I don't know, so it could be true. You've seen enough scary movies where the ghost is like, we're going to come and get you, and they come. So I had to be careful of that. And the house I lived in wasn't even my family's house. Make a long story short, we're going to go on the back of the Daysicle, and we're going to catch you right up to speed really quick. But I grew up in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. My family moved to Michigan because my dad worked for Borders, moved our family to Michigan the summer after my junior year in high school. Went to high school in Michigan for a couple months. I absolutely hated it. I could write a book about all the things that went on, but I'm not going to for this podcast. And my parents realized how miserable I was and let me go back to high school in Pennsylvania and finish my senior year after missing like the first 2 months, which was really cool of them. And I moved into my mom's best friend's house, or the house that she was renting, Joanne Speranza, who has since passed from cancer, and I love you, Joanne. And thank you for taking me into your haunted house and taking good care of me. So it was Joanne and her husband, Rick. They had 2 kids, and I'm like 17 at the time. They had a son, Ricky, who was 15, and they had a daughter, Lindsay, who was 10. So I moved into this giant mansion. I'm talking enormous. A place like, I've never been in a house that big since. I probably never will again, but it was incredible. And they were very well off, and they were building their dream home, so they rented this house in the middle of nowhere in Washington Crossing. Actually, I think it was New Hope. Basically the same place, right on the Delaware River, where the Civil War was fought, where Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas. Hey, that's why this is a Christmas theme. Winning. But, so I moved into their house, and my room was incredible. It was in the top part of the house. I had a spiral staircase to my room. I mean, I could throw a party in my room, and nobody would even know it. So they took me in, and which was so nice of them. And like, I was back. I was like with my friends. Crazy thing is, the house was haunted, and looking back at it now, it's terrifying. The weird thing is, Joanne and Rick had some serious issues with their relationship, and while they were building this dream house, they actually had a very messy divorce. So I was in the middle of a weird, very weird situation. Rick had left. It was just all of us. More or less, it was a nightmare, and I didn't want to be there, but staying there was a nightmare too. So everyone knows that old houses make lots of noises, and I couldn't deny the fact, like when I was in my room hanging out, I would hear lots of noises. And the most common one was like dragging on the carpet. Think about like taking I mean, I don't know, like a brush and just dragging it on the carpet. And I would also hear like, it sounded like fingers and hands on the wall, like just sliding down the wall, almost like something was trying to climb it. And it was very unusual noises, and it definitely terrified me. And I would get into a ball in my bed and just pretend it wasn't there, and I would just fall asleep. And looking back at it now, I'm not sure if I could have actually done that, but I was so happy to be back in Pennsylvania in school. I think if I would have known moving back that I would have to live in a haunted house, I think I would have been okay with it just to be back. But I kept on hearing like doors and clinking and tons of noises from my bathroom. My bathroom would make tons of noises to the point where I would shut the door. But then I was afraid to shut the door because it would open. And everyone was hearing it, but everyone was keeping it to themselves in their own way. And one morning we were having breakfast before school, and I was downstairs sitting at the kitchen table, and I think Ricky was there. Their daughter, Lindsay, was definitely there, and Joanne was there. And Lindsay, being 10 years old, went to her mom, and she was like, why were you dressed up as a witch last night? And Joanne was like, I wasn't dressed up as a witch last night. And Lindsay was like, well, I went downstairs to get a glass of water, and when I went back to my room, you passed me on the stairs and you were dressed like a witch. And telling you that all of us were just like, oh. But then we chalked it up that it must be a bad dream or something like that. And I think more or less it was denial. We just played it off like you had a bad dream. You don't know what you're 10 years old. It's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And so we played it off. We went to school, did nothing of it. And then like the next day, Joanne and I were talking with Ricky, and we started, saying like, oh, we hear a lot of noises in the house. And I mean, Ricky and I were all around the house and playing, so it made sense to have banging in the house with two teenage kids in it. But we didn't really put much stock into it until about 2 weeks later, when Joanne was sleeping in her bed, and she's highly stressed right now, and she is pretty much enraged in her own way, laying in bed because she hears Ricky and I in the kitchen making food at like 1 a.m. and we're banging pots and we're just loud. And finally she's in bed and she just loses it. She's like coming out to the kitchen to yell at us, and when she walks out there to catch us red-handed, there's no one there. The kitchen is completely dead. She goes upstairs and checks on Ricky and I. We're both in our rooms, we're passed out, and she starts kind of freaking out, and for the right reasons. And the next day she talked to us and she's like, I heard all this banging in the kitchen, it was keeping me up. When I went in there, you weren't there. And at this point, I pretty much made the decision, and everyone else realized, that we were living in a haunted house. And I almost got like kind of tough with it in my own way. Like I was so relentless after every night and all the dragging and banging that I would lay in my bed in my little ball hearing all these noises, and I would just talk shit to the ghosts, never out loud. Obviously, that's the last thing you ever want. But I would talk shit. I'd be laying down and being like, oh, you ghost bitch, you can't hurt me. And like, I would try to give myself my own little confidence with it. And when my mom came to visit me and stay at the house, she said that while she was sleeping, she heard her door open, and my mom, in her own very spiritual way, just said, make sure you follow the light. And I think she said that because, I think she said that. She told me she said it, so she must have said it. But to make me think maybe she got rid of it, because I definitely would talk to her on the phone. I'm like, Mom, this house is, kind of weird. And, I didn't really tell my friends too much about it. But one night, my best friend in high school, one of them, Greg Griffin, was doing a sleepover with me. And Greg was like one of those jock, really built dudes. He was kind of like the person in high school that was one of my good friends, that if I ran my mouth and like talked trash to someone, they weren't going to beat me up, because Greg was one of my BFFs, and he's definitely not someone that you would want to fight. And so we went out and hung out, and Greg was kind of a scaredy cat in his own way. And I told him, and he knew that I told him that the house we were living in was haunted and all of that. And he spent the night, and in my room I had a giant king-size bed, so he slept on his side, I slept on my side. And apparently this was not okay with the ghosts, because after the night, and while we were laying in bed, we laid down, and I was joking around with him, and he's like, ooh, the haunted house. And we were laying down, and like, as soon as we kill the light and we're laying down and dead quiet, we started hearing a little dragging on the carpet. And Greg got very upset. He like curled into his ball, he couldn't believe it, and then we heard some banging in the bathroom, and I'll never forget this moment for the rest of my life, but we started feeling poking at the bottom of the bed. Like, almost like someone was laying underneath it with their finger poking up. And man, Ricky, if you hear this podcast and I find out later this was you and you slept under the bed, man, you're the greatest friend ever for pulling that prank. But it wasn't. We felt poking at the bottom of the bed, and we freaked. Turned on the lights, did everything. He wanted to go home. Wasn't possible. And we just waited it out and barely even slept until we both passed out and it went away. But the reality of the situation is, kind of had like the first contact of like physicalness with the ghost. And the way this whole story kind of pulls together is like, I had a giant walk-in closet and I was throwing stuff in there, and I noticed there was like 3 shelves that were built into the wall, and on the bottom shelf there was a bunch of writing on the bottom. And I mean, everything I'm telling you right now is completely true, and I leaned down and I started reading it. And it was written by one of the kids that used to live in the house. And it said, you need to get out of this house. This house is very haunted. The haunting will not stop. Do anything you can to leave. Like, it was like a paragraph. I wish I would have taken a photo of it, but there was no cameras. Well, there was cameras, but I didn't have a cell phone to take a picture. In retrospect now, I absolutely should have. But the most terrifying part of all of it, it said, whatever you do, do not look up at night through the skylights. And the hallway of the upstairs had all these skylights in it. And I never did. And I still think about it to this day. Like, if I thought about going out there and like going out there and looking up, but there'd be like a face or a monster or something. And I showed everyone the writing on the wall, except for Lindsay, obviously. And I mean, it was believable. And I wanted to get out of there. I started sleeping at friends' houses as much as possible to not be in this haunted mansion, but the haunting never did stop. And I'm not even too sure if that house isn't there. And it seems kind of weird to talk about this, but ghosts are definitely real. I have absolutely no doubt. I'm not really too sure what they really are, though. I've heard people say that they're from another dimension, or that they're just ancient people that are humans that can't find their way to heaven or to death. And I don't really buy any of that for the most part. I definitely think that they're extremely unexplainable, and I definitely want to know more. And hopefully with technology we'll eventually understand. But one thing I do know, much like aliens, ghosts are real, and ghosts are in space. So that's my Christmas story. And no, I still don't use Ouija boards because I'm afraid those ghosts will find me while we are in space. We are in space.